We're rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast.
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 113, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
And I'm Jack Haas.
And here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
Well, first of all, I just realized that we've exceeded 2 years of doing this.
Oh,
can you believe that?
So
that just blipped by, didn't it?
You're good at math, so 52 times 2 would be 104. So that was actually like 2 months ago.
Yeah, I know, and I didn't realize it at that time. I just realized it now.
Very good, very good.
But I guess that's beside the point, because I don't understand why you have to be so confrontational about everything.
I'm going to run away now.
So if you haven't figured it out already, we're going to be talking about conflict, and it's unavoidable.
And it's funny because we just had a string of conflict recently directed at us. And, you start thinking, is real estate inherently conflict filled? Did I choose the wrong industry? Things like that start to pop up. And what we kind of came to realize was that there is no conflict-free industry. And so we're going to talk about some of the conflicts we've experienced in real estate and in other professions, and then also how to potentially deal with those.
So let's start with the big one. How about, have we had a flip yet that we haven't had a conflict?
Conflict. Yeah, it's funny because seems like every time we do a flip, neighbors have some type of complaint. The roofer's got some nails in my driveway, and they just have they got to come over and give you a piece of their mind. It seems like, I don't know if it's weird. Is it an insecurity thing, or something like they feel they're not achieving something they wanted, so they have to come over and complain? Or I've tried to understand, but it seems to happen a very high percentage of the time. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but what can you do other than say sorry about that, and just kind of apologize and try to de-escalate. And that's kind of a theme that you'll see running through all these conflict avoidance or conflict resolution type techniques, is to de-escalate.
Yeah, and when it comes to the flipping thing too, I have a hard time understanding the motivation and the problem they have, because if it was happening in my neighborhood, my first thought would be, I'd be thankful that somebody is taking this destroyed house and actually improving my property value by doing something about it.
Yeah, technically we're helping their property values of the neighborhood, and it should only really help them if they ever were to sell their own house. You're improving the look of the neighboring house that probably was trashed prior to, because usually that's the kind that we buy. So I don't know what the problem is, and sometimes I think they just don't like construction and things going on around them too, and they see that as a disruption. So that may contribute to some of it too.
So one of the ones that we have going on right now is a property line dispute.
Yeah, right in the middle of a rehab, and all of a sudden the neighbor comes over and just starts kind of nicely, starting out nice, and then it escalated, through us basically not just giving in immediately to their demands. It kind of escalated, and I tried every conflict resolution technique that I had, and there was nothing that was going to de-escalate this. At that point, you just have to engage the professionals, title company, lawyers, those types of things, and just resolve it that way, and just don't have contact if you can't de-escalate in person or work something out between the two parties.
Well, in this case, you even brought up a good point. I mean, he had been battling the previous owner for decades. Seriously, it was 30, 40 years, if not more, regarding this property line issue. We didn't even hear about it until just a few weeks ago. And, he's just has 40 years of being morally right that you're trying to compete against. It's a losing battle at that point.
Yeah, you're just on the receiving end of decades of pent-up resentment. And sometimes the perception too is that flippers or real estate investors just have super deep pockets, which, if people saw the numbers on some of these properties, they'd know that's not the truth. But they just see, a lot of activity, a lot of changes, materials being hauled in, and they just think, well, the money is never ending, so I'm going to get a piece of that. So they almost see it as kind of a cash grab attempt. And, that's just not the case typically. I mean, most flippers are running on pretty tight margins, and us being no different. The last thing we want to do is throw money at a property line dispute.
Right. So what else have we seen? You had a kind of an interesting conflict, and we've talked about it before, simply at the post office, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, just because the guy recognized our logo, and he came to the post office to try to find us and confront us about sending us these evil postcards. Yeah, and that's one that we've talked about, a few times in the past, but I really don't understand the anger there. And ultimately, I just had to kind of walk away from the guy because I tried to tell him, we apologize, just please throw it in the garbage with our apologies. And he wasn't having any of it. So I just pretty much had to say, have a nice day and walk away. And if he wants to continue to be mad about it, I guess that's his choice, but I'm not going to participate in that. Mm-hmm. And I guess, so that's just kind of something, obviously your tenants, typically hate you or your property manager a large percentage of the time, which seems to be kind of set up for disaster. The property manager tenant relationship or landlord tenant relationship is almost always adversarial, especially like at checkout times and am I getting my deposit back and you ruined this and you're not getting your deposit back and all that. There's always an adversarial element to that. So several tenants are always mad at us too for, various things. And sometimes we hear about those and sometimes we don't. But property management is a massively high conflict zone, definitely.
Yeah. So that's one of those things that you get what you pay for when it comes to those property managers, because they really take the blunt of that abuse.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're doing everything perfectly as a property manager, you just won't hear from the tenants. Mm. So you're never going to get kudos. You're never going to get praise. You're only going to hear from them if they have a problem. So most of your communications are typically either neutral or negative, almost never positive. So, that's probably not a great industry if you're conflict averse. But let's talk about prior to when we were in real estate. Were the other professions that we were in, were they conflict free?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially
I repeat it. I used to do business credit card underwriting for a very large bank that has a service center here in Fargo. And being on the receiving end of people declined credit cards or not increasing their credit limit. Those, I've heard every blue language you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And you basically have to you just sat there and let them vent, because in the end, they're recognizing their own problem and they're just directing that anger towards you. But
right.
That was never a pleasant experience. And usually by the time they got to me, they had been through 2 or 3 other people already. So,
resentment has time to build.
I was the escalation point. So it was pretty brutal by that point.
Yeah, or even just in our previous technology jobs, you're dealing with supposed, professional people, and, we would get yelled at periodically. It just, conflict is there in every industry. I've had it in photography as well. People might hate the results of their images, and sometimes that's just insecurity on their part. Sometimes it is an actual mistake on my part. I don't know of an industry that is conflict free. So let's state that hypothesis that there is no conflict free industry, and you've chosen, a business and to invest in real estate that may have the same or more conflict than others. So how can you move forward and operate in that industry and be successful?
Well, like you said, the de-escalation is probably one of the big things. If you try to stay calm, they will eventually, hopefully, realize how off the wall they're reacting.
Well, let's first start with, before you even, try some techniques. Is it possible to just ignore the conflicts or just run away? Like if a tenant is calling you or texting you all the time, if you manage your own properties, can you just not answer them?
Well, that works for a while.
Right,
the problem is that as you ignore it, their temperature rises.
Right.
And it's just going to make it worse.
Just worse and worse. And they're just getting madder and madder, and they're deciding, well, if I'm not getting my deposit back, I'm just going to trash this place and do as much damage as I can. So a much better route would be to respond quickly and listen and let them feel validated, at least in their complaint, even if you completely disagree with it. Then you can hear them out and then deal with what you think might be the best resolution according to your guidelines that you set up in your lease. Mm-hmm. And, it's pretty much usually all spelled out. So if they say, well, I want my deposit back, and you say, well, we would give you your deposit back, except for you didn't clean this and this, and you broke this, and that, according to the lease, is this amount of dollars, it's pretty cut and dried. And then you can just stick to that, and if they choose not to accept that, then, you can escalate to, your lawyers or whatever you have to do at that point. But, that it's best to confront the issue head on rather than just ignore it. They're just going to get more mad.
Right. And in the end, I think a good example, if people haven't read it yet, and I'll put a link in the show notes, but what was that? And the name of that? Never Split the Difference.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way because, if you want to talk about conflict, this guy tells stories about severe conflict that he dealt with. And if he can use some of those strategies in hostage negotiations, I think you could possibly pull some points out in talking to a next-door neighbor regarding a line dispute.
Yeah, Never Split the Difference is basically a sales book that takes lessons learned from CIA hostage negotiator. Was that?
Yep.
That is what he did. Yeah, so there's a lot of parallels there. So yeah, very good book. Another thing you can do when you're approaching someone that you have conflict with is to assume positive intent. And this is huge because if you're walking up to, the neighbor, the tenant, the seller, buyer, whatever, the other person on the other end of your disagreement, and just assuming they're out to get you, out to hurt you, out to screw you somehow, and you're going to do that first before they do it to you, how do you think that's going to end? It's just going to, end horribly. Mm-hmm. So if you assume positive intent and try to see it from their point of view, like, if a tenant's complaining about something, just think about when you used to rent an apartment, and if something was broke and it didn't get fixed right away and you didn't feel like they were being heard, or you were being heard as a tenant and your faucet was just dripping nonstop or something, and no one ever came to fix it, I mean, you'd be pretty upset. So sometimes, a complaint is valid, and you need to assess that as the owner or from your side of the transaction or situation. Do they have a valid complaint? And have the ability to say, yes, that is valid, and we're going to take care of that, and we apologize. I mean, that right there is going to resolve it if it's something that's valid, a valid complaint that they have that you are expected to take care of. Now, let's say they have a complaint and it's not valid. That's a whole different ballgame there.
Until it gets to the point where you keep telling them that you understand, and eventually they call you out and say, will you stop saying that? You do not understand.
Right.
That actually happened to me just last week.
Yep.
So, yeah, it is to the point where you do have to empathize. But I guess at a certain point, I found myself, it just becomes a barrage of noise at a certain point. Right. They're just spewing so much hate and anger. And you're acknowledging that you're still listening to them, but I guess I must have crossed over a line at one point.
Well, you just have to realize you reach a point of diminishing returns. You're not going to resolve it by the techniques you're using. If that's the case, then you escalate to whatever the next step is, whether it's lawyers, title company, real estate agent, whatever, insurance person, whatever, the issue is around. But you still can kind of sleep at night knowing that you tried your best to resolve it before escalating to those points. And 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to work. There's been plenty of times where we've had conflict with people, and, like one, in a eviction situation where we did a cash for keys and they left happy, everyone was happy, and versus, evicting them through the court process, which is a lot more adversarial and can be a lot more damaging to the property and the relationship. So you have to kind of look at each situation differently and say, did I try my best to resolve this? Did I assume positive intent from the other party? Did I try to de-escalate as best I could? And if you did all those things and it still isn't resolved, well, some things are not going to be resolvable. You just have to, at that point, just follow the different channels that you have available to you.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about, you got a sump pump hose story here.
Yeah. Okay. This is a kind of a escalation and assuming positive intent. So we live in a house that we have a fence, and sump pumps are running, every 10 minutes this time of year because the water table is really high up here in Fargo and all the snow melted and everything. So sump pumps are running, and the house next to us is vacant, and the property manager, it was a rental, and the property manager came over and just started immediately yelling at my wife because our sump pump was in his yard. Well, he's not aware of the fact that our fence actually is a foot back from the property line because that's the setback that's required when we built the fence. So actually our sump pump hose is still on our property, and he's just incorrect, but he immediately started just yelling and swearing and everything at my wife. And, how do you think that ended?
Oh, I'm sure she loved it.
I mean, he's lucky that, I wasn't home, or he didn't knock on the door of a football player's house or somebody that would have just, punched his teeth in, because that easily could have happened. Because, if someone is in the house and they hear their wife being reamed out, I mean, odds of getting punched in the teeth are extremely high. So as a person trying to, solve this issue from his point of view, why would you choose that path? He had to have known that was never going to work. And the way he approached that problem was never going to have the desired effect. If you just would have come up and said, hey, look, I was trying to mow the grass and it's kind of wet over here because your sump pump is getting some water on my side, on my property. Could you move your hose a little bit? No problem. Happy to do it. I'll move the hose over a foot. Easily resolved. But, now because of that, now she's calling the property management company, trying to get his name and wants to get him fired and all this stuff. So he's, either going to get his teeth punched in or get fired or at least reprimanded, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're the owner of a property management company and you hear that your employees are just reaming out neighbors, that's probably not something that you approve of as a property manager owner.
Yeah, that was an interesting situation you had there. And then what makes it even more so is that since we are in real estate investing, was your first inclination to give that fella a call? Like we know most of the owners around here.
Yeah, and I do know the owner of this company, and I kind of decided to stay out of it and let my wife handle it how she wanted to. But had it been me that was there, I would have definitely got his name and then called the owner of the company and told him how his employee was behaving. And I think as a employer, I would want to know that if that was going on. Mm-hmm. So, I think it'd be only right to tell the owner what was going on. But either way, it's not going to end well for this guy, that's going around acting like this. So that's kind of an example of how not to approach a situation when it easily could have been resolved had he just asked nicely.
One of the de-escalations things that I used to do, especially when it came to credit card underwriting like that, and I'd pull it out every once in a while, especially if somebody got really super angry. I actually would say something like, I'm really sorry. You must have had a really bad day. and actually,
that almost that's verging on condescending though. Like you're kind of being a smart ass.
But I didn't mean it like that.
Right.
I actually was trying to be empathetic and trying to almost change the subject a little bit.
I feel like that's difficult. Like if I said that, I don't know that I could say that without sounding sarcastic.
Because you always sound sarcastic.
Right. So if it sounds like you had a really bad day, then they'd be just like, what? they just, immediately would get worse. So I think you have to be aware of how you sound and your own personality too. And what you're capable of.
And it's what the context of that conversation is at that point.
Right.
But
there's lots of, I'm sure the credit. Oh, I forgot. I almost forgot. I had a job where I did customer service for like an online travel company, like Expedia type place. And customers would call all the time, just super enraged that their flights have been canceled, which of course this website has nothing to do with. That's all the airlines. But they would just ream you out. And, what can you do? All you can do is listen to them and let them vent.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I would have got mad back, how do you think that would have ended up for me as an employee?
Right. Yeah, that's another thing. It's almost empowering, though, when it's so out of your hands. Mm-hmm. There really isn't any – physically, there's nothing you could do other than listen to them. Yeah,
and then they're calling, expecting you to be able to do something because that's where they booked the ticket from, so they expect you to be able to handle it. And, at that point, you can just say, you can just listen to them. That's all you can do. And then tell them what their options are. Present their options to them. And if they don't like any of those, then at least you did your best.
Mm-hmm.
So in summary, there's conflict in every industry. Real estate investing is no different. So you best learn how to deal with it and some techniques to de-escalate, assume positive intent, and try to resolve conflicts when they do occur. So it'll cost you the least amount of money to resolve these issues, because that's kind of always what it comes down to. How much is this going to cost us?
Yeah. Because in the end, if you can't resolve it face-to-face, your lease level of cost is going to be face-to-face dealing with it directly. Because as it escalates, then you're getting other people involved, which are going to charge you for it.
Exactly. All right. Well, we put a lot of effort into providing useful content for the show. And if you found value and have any interest in supporting us with a small donation, head over to patreon.com/REI Rookies.
If you have any thoughts or questions, shoot us an email at info@reirookies.com. You can always find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at REI Rookies.
And if you like what you're hearing, head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other rookie investors out there find the show. And remember, get off the bench
and into the game. We'll see you next time.
This episode is brought to you by FargoTurnkey.com. Do you live in a good cash-flowing market? If so, Turnkey isn't the best choice for you. You should buy in your market. If you don't live in a great market for investors, where can you find profitable cash-flowing properties? We love the Midwest, where prices are reasonable and the people are great. Ever heard of North Dakota Nice or see the movie Fargo? That's where we live. We personally invest here and have lived here all of our lives. How does Turnkey work? We find the property, we rehab the property, we find you a tenant and place you under the care of our local property manager, who we trust with all our own investment properties. I'm sure you have questions about how the process works and what to do next. If that's the case, fill out the form on FargoTurnkey.com and we'll reach out to see if you are a good fit for our business. We have a limited supply of properties every month, so we can sell only to a few qualified buyers. See you at FargoTurnkey.com.
I don't like to tell a man what to do with his money, but if you ain't investing in property, then you're dumber than a dummy.
I'm not dumb. I'm smart.
Well, buy property. That's my advice.